Hello everyone. Today we are going to be taking a look at Iran. Now, I've been saying for a while, every time we talk about Iran, that I'm not optimistic. I hope to be wrong. And I've said that, I think, almost every time. So I thought it might be wise to take a look at why I don't think this is likely to produce a change in the government. But first, because this is a very important thing if it succeeds, I think we should take a look at the implications outside of Iran. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Iraq. We won't linger on it for long because although it is very relevant, I don't know enough about it to give quality commentary. Iraq is one of Iran's biggest trading partners, and Iran has substantial political influence in Iraq. It would be entirely safe to say that any change of government in Iran would create substantial instability in Iraq as well. Of all Iran's international relationships, probably the closest one is with Syria. It's also likely that instability in Iran will have the greatest effect on Syria. Now, the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad is no longer master of his own house. He is not completely in control of Syria, and he hasn't been for quite some time. In order to maintain his grip on power, he has essentially sold out the country's sovereignty, both to Russia and to Iran, but as we've noted before, Russia's influence around the world and on its own borders is falling substantially. So that leaves Iran as the dominant influence in Syria, along with its proxies, particularly Hezbollah. Now, if the government in Iran was to fall, we could be seeing either Assad reasserting himself and reclaiming control over the country, or we could also see an increased period of instability as the civil war heats up again. Most likely it will be a little bit of both, leaning heavily towards Assad reasserting himself. It's extremely unlikely that he's going to be overthrown or forced out anytime soon, and if he is, it will require substantial outside help. Then there's Saudi Arabia. The main reason that America and Saudi Arabia are still allies, when from the outside it looks like their relationship is seriously struggling, is because America wants a regional ally to counterbalance Iran. Now that is Saudi Arabia and that is Israel. And right now, Israel seems to be a far better partner. Recently, we've seen Saudi Arabia and the United States clash over all sorts of issues. These range from human rights to oil pricing and production. If the government in Iran is replaced with one that's less hostile to America, we'll see Saudi Arabia and America become far less friendly, and Saudi Arabia will probably start looking to a different great power patron, most likely China. Israel will also lose importance, but it's not going to drift away in the same way. The United States has far more in common with Israel than it does with Saudi Arabia, and they do have other shared interests. But if Iran changes, it will be less of a priority. Now, why this revolution is unlikely to succeed. This will sound a bit counterintuitive, but bear with me because I intend to justify it. Revolutions demand, in almost all cases, the at least partial consent of existing political elites or guarantors of power. That's presidents, kings, or on the guarantors of power side, security services or the military. They need to partially consent. They don't need to approve it, and they don't need to be happy about it. So to understand and to justify this, let's take a look at a few examples. Let's start with Iran. In 1978-1979, the Islamic Revolution that brought the current government to power. So in Iran, 1979, January, the Shah leaves. He leaves voluntarily because he feels that the United States is no longer backing him. He is not in any immediate physical danger, but he leaves, he consents to his own overthrowing, and he is gone. Now let's take a look at Ukraine. The special forces, the riot police, the security forces stay loyal to the state, but the political elite consents. Yanukovych leaves, he flees to Russia, revolution succeeds. Let's look at Egypt during the Arab Spring. Mubarak is staying, he doesn't want to leave, the military refuse to support him against the protesters, they consent, whether they approve or not doesn't matter, but they consent. Mubarak is gone, revolution succeeds. Now let's look at some moments where this didn't happen. Russian Revolution 1905, prior to the one that brought in the Bolsheviks in 1917. The army stays on side, the revolution produces some reforms, which will be important in 1917 to the next revolution, but for its own sake it doesn't really succeed. The Tsar is not removed, he stays in power. 1989 protests in China, government stays mostly united, military stays loyal, protests fail. In Bahrain, another Arab Spring revolution, political leadership stays mostly united, military doesn't defect, revolution again fails. Now there are a lot of caveats here. Having this consent doesn't guarantee success. It also won't work the same way with anti-colonial revolutions or revolutions that involve a foreign power. We are specifically looking at internal revolutions, which have the goal of removing the current government. Now, right now, I don't see the political unity of the leadership fracturing, and I also don't see the security forces or the military defecting to support the opposition. Now, this wasn't the best time for a revolution. In an ideal situation, it would have been immediately after the death of the top figure in the Iranian government, currently Khomeini, which would create the instability in the leadership required to promote defections. So because of this, it seems to me, unfortunately, it's very unlikely that the current government is going to be overthrown. This has been a look at the revolution in Iran, and thank you for listening.